Ich mache die Begrüßung auf Deutsch. Wir haben gesehen, herzlich willkommen im Deutschen Bundestag, wie technisch fortschrittlich wir hier im Deutschen Bundestag sind. Wie lange es dauert, tatsächlich so etwas zum Laufen zu bekommen. Zum Glück lag es nicht an uns, es lag an der Bundestagtechnik. Herzlich willkommen zur vorläufig letzten Bitcoin im Bundestag Veranstaltung. Ich kann kaum glauben, dass das Jahr schon fast vorbei ist und ich kann kaum glauben, dass diese Veranstaltungen jetzt vorläufig vorbei sind. Ich hätte nie gedacht, als wir angefangen haben, dass sie so erfolgreich werden und wir so viel Publikum bekommen und so viel positives Feedback, wie wir bekommen haben. Und deswegen möchte ich diese Gelegenheit heute nutzen, um mal Danke zu sagen. Danke vor allen Dingen an mein Team, das das alles hier möglich gemacht hat. Vorneweg der arme Stefan, der jetzt hin und her gelaufen ist. Stefan Schmidt, ohne dich wäre das hier nicht. Aber auch die anderen vor der Tür, Nina Scheer, mein Büroleiter, Dominik Klast oder Thorsten Elsholz, mein Pressereferent, alle haben dazu beigetragen, dass es hier erfolgreich wird. Ein anderes ganz großes Dankeschön an all die Experten und Speaker, die im Laufe der Zeit hier waren und meinen Kollegen und den Assistenten und den Bitcoinern, die sich hier eingefunden haben, Bitcoin ein bisschen näher gebracht haben. Es waren viele, ich möchte es namentlich alle gar nicht aufzählen, jeder kann das im Internet nachgucken. Herzlichen Dank, dass ihr da wart. Ich kann wirklich nicht genug danken, weil ohne euch hätte es diese Veranstaltung ebenfalls nicht gegeben. Und zum Schluss ein dickes Dankeschön an Sie, an euch, dass ihr jedes Mal da wart. Und ich bin wirklich froh, dass auch diesmal die Bude fast voll ist und wir tatsächlich dafür gesorgt haben, dass Bitcoin im Bundestag ein Thema geworden ist. Zumindest hat bis jetzt jeder Bundestagsabgeordneter und jeder Mitarbeiter das Thema Bitcoin auf dem Schirm, weil wir sind ihnen wirklich auf den Geist gegangen damit. So viele Einladungen, wie sie bekommen haben, so viele Informationen, wie sie bekommen haben. Wir haben hier tatsächlich etwas Großes gestartet und wir werden auch nicht nachlassen. Das heißt, Stefan und ich werden uns zusammensetzen und überlegen, was wir nächstes Jahr noch machen, ob wir mit den Veranstaltungen weitermachen oder wie die Zukunft von Bitcoin im Bundestag ausschaut. Wir haben heute noch einen speziellen Gast und da bin ich ganz besonders froh, dass er heute da ist. Es ist der erste englischsprachige Gast, den wir heute hier haben. Also die Präsentation wird auch auf Englisch sein. Wenn Sie Schwierigkeiten haben oder mit den Fragen einfach nachher fragen auf Deutsch, wir übersetzen gerne. Ich bin sehr, sehr froh, dass wir heute Samson Mow im Deutschen Bundestag begrüßen. Samson, thank you very much for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Samson Mow dürfte den meisten Bitcoinern selbstverständlich bekannt sein. Für die, denen er nicht bekannt ist, Samson Mow ist der CEO von Yan3, einem Bitcoin-Technologieunternehmen, das sich auf die Beschleunigung der Hyperbitcoinisierung spezialisiert. Wir kennen ihn vor allen Dingen von seinem Fachwissen her, aber auch, weil er quer durch die Welt reist, um Regierungen zu beraten, wie sie Bitcoin adaptieren können. El Salvador, Madeira, Kolumbien, Suriname, jetzt kommt er gerade aus Thailand, hat er mir erzählt, überall hat er Termine mit Politikern, hat er Termine mit Regierungsmitgliedern, um Bitcoin in diesen Ländern zu adaptieren. Er war maßgeblich mit daran beteiligt, dass El Salvador Bitcoin als Legal Tender eingeführt hat. Also wenn es einen besseren, oder es gibt einfach keinen besseren, der heute hier sein könnte, um zu den Politikern zu sprechen, wieso es wichtig ist, Bitcoin tatsächlich zu adoptieren. Als einer der Top-Führungskräfte im Bitcoin-Ökosystem reicht seine Expertise von der Leitung der größten Börsen- und Mining-Pools als CEO von BTCC bis hin zur Leitung und Entwicklung und Bereitstellung der Bitcoin-Infrastruktur als CSO von Blockstream. Samson Mow, thank you very much for being here. I really appreciate that you take your time and speak to my fellow MPs, their employees, and to all the interested Bitcoiners. So the microphone is yours. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Joana. Thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's also good that this is the only English talk, right?
Yeah.
So we'll see if everyone understands, but I think it's no issue. So Joanna already did my intro, so I can go skip that slide, but I'm here to talk to you about Bitcoin strategies for nation states, and my presentation's prepared for a more general audience, and I think a lot of you are Bitcoiners, so if I'm going over things that you know, then just bear with me. But I'm sort of preparing this from the point of view of speaking to Germany as a whole. Okay, so I don't think I need to do my intro. About Gen3, we're a Bitcoin technology company. We also developed the Aqua wallet, but our mission is to accelerate hyper-Bitcoinization or Bitcoin adoption around the world. And I think there is some concern about Bitcoiners engaging with governments, and I think this is has been a point of contention or discussion in Germany, especially with the Bitcoin community here. But I think it is a valuable thing to engage, because while we can decide whether to engage or not to engage, the altcoin projects like Ethereum and whatnot, they are going to actively engage. So if we don't at least talk with governments and politicians, then we're automatically at a disadvantage. And they're also better capitalized than us because they sold a token or did ICO or did other things. So I think engaging is better than not engaging. So what we're trying to do is mainly educate and teach governments and politicians what Bitcoin is, why they should want Bitcoin, and why it will benefit them. So we've done a lot of work around the world, meeting with different politicians and heads of state pretty much everywhere now. We've been in Montenegro, we've been in Colombia, we've been in Suriname, I think as Joana mentioned, and also Thailand, but that's secret still. So my presentation will start on what is money, just assuming a very generic audience of people that don't know Bitcoin. And I think this is a very important point to cover, because to understand Bitcoin, you must first understand what money is. So money is a medium of exchange, a unit of account, and a store of value. It can exist in various forms, either digitally or physically. And I think as we've moved towards digital money, it has become easier and easier for money to be corrupted. But money is just something that facilitates trade and human evolution or civilization. So money has evolved a long way. Since the beginning of recorded human civilization, we've used seashells, rhinestones, beads, beaver pelts, precious metals, coins, paper money, digital money, and Bitcoin would probably fit into the digital money category. And I believe there is some contention about whether or not to attend the Bitcoin in Bundestag talks from some MPs, because they're worried about whether the party is against Bitcoin or should they be associated with Bitcoin. And maybe there's dislike of Bitcoin. But my point with this slide is really there's no need to worry about Bitcoin or not like Bitcoin. It's be like not liking seashells or not liking beads. Bitcoin is simply money, and it is valuable because people deem it to be valuable. And there's nothing right or wrong about that. It's just a form of interaction between people. So money solves this key problem of the coincidence of wants. So in a barter economy, you must find someone that has what you want to conduct a trade. But with money, we abstract away the need to trade directly, and we can use a second layer, if you will, of value to trade directly without the need of this coincidence. But every form of money we've invented has been to solve this problem to differing degrees of success. If you look at some of the other forms of money, the earlier forms of money, they're easily degradable, like seashells and beads, or even beaver pelts. But as we've improved our technology, we've made improved forms of money, with Bitcoin being the most advanced form. So these are the main properties of money: that it must be durable, divisible, acceptable, scarce, portable, and uniform. My slides are a bit broken, but it's okay. So paper money was created to fulfill a deficiency of gold, which is it's not very portable, and it's also hard to account for and to trade with. So paper money was created to make it easier to use gold effectively. But there is always a temptation for people to corrupt the money supply, as it is from the dawn of time. So what happened in 1971, we went off of the gold standard temporarily, but it's not very temporary. And what that led to was basically the elimination of a key property of money, which is the scarcity. So without the anchoring of money to gold, which is relatively scarce, people can print money. Central banks can print money with ease. And this is leading to inflation and degradation of economies around the world. But more importantly, this is a thematic aspect of money that has constantly occurred and reoccurred over time. And we see this with the reserve currencies. Every reserve currency lasts roughly about 100 years or so. And it usually declines because of the temptation to print money or to degrade the money. But now we're reaching the end of the lifespan of the US dollar, which is sort of the reserve currency by which all other fiat currencies are pegged to, and the rise of Bitcoin as a potential new global reserve currency. And this is not something that's happened overnight. The dollar in and of itself has been in decline for the past 100 years, effectively losing all purchasing power, dropping to close to zero from 100 years ago. And these fiat currency declines are echoed throughout history. So in Germany, you have the paper mark, and the collapse of that was very spectacular, as everyone knows. And the time frame of the collapse was also very rapid. So in a month's time, it just became worthless. So fiat currencies, when they lose value or when they are rendered worthless, is a very quick phenomenon. And I think this is why people are not appreciating how rapidly Bitcoin can jump to $1 million or even higher, simply because the fiat currencies will collapse. So what is the answer to the question of what is money? In my view, money is an abstraction of human time and energy. People like to say Bitcoin is a battery, but it's not a battery in the sense of storing electrical potential, but it's more about human time and energy. And we use money to get ahead. You can work harder and store your time and energy in this money to, say, pass on to your children or to benefit future generations. So Bitcoin is money. And with that, money is now energy and information, because Bitcoin is produced and maintained with energy. So there is a dimensionality of energy here. But at the same time, Bitcoin is also information. It is very easily stored. If you can store 12 words, then you can store Bitcoin. So this transformation is very profound, and I don't think most governments have yet fully understood this transformation. Because if money is information now, and it is decentralized and immutable, which Bitcoin is, then there is no way to control the money supply. And any attempts to do so will usually fail, such as CBDCs or things like that that are centralized in nature. And there are attempts to control money, obviously, from many governments, and to control Bitcoin, but usually they fail. Efforts like to launch CBDCs, they usually fail even in countries with heavy surveillance, like they ban VPNs or they're monitoring the population. Still, nobody wants to use the CBDC because it is inferior, and when you can benchmark that against something like Bitcoin, which is free-flowing, they obviously trend towards the latter. So with Bitcoin, money is now energy and information. This changes a lot of the global dynamics as well, because many countries that are poor or underdeveloped actually have a lot of energy reserves. So if you're a country with oil, you can take the oil, put it into a barrel, and sell it anywhere in the world. You can't really do that with geothermal or hydro. But with Bitcoin, you can kind of use that energy to accumulate Bitcoin and then sell the Bitcoin. So many countries in the developing world or the global south are interested now in Bitcoin because it unlocks a new period of potential economic growth for them by mining Bitcoin. So because of this transformation, I wanted to segue a bit into nuclear power. And there is this thinking that nuclear is not green energy, and solar or wind are green. But the problem is a lot of these green technologies are in fact not so green. Solar panels are made out of a lot of things like glass and plastics and aluminum, silicon, copper, and silver. But the challenge of making solar panels is that they're largely made of coal. So you need coal, high quality coal, and high quality quartz. And then you fire it in an arc furnace, which also is fueled by coal. So effectively, you're using coal to create a solar panel. But there's also the problem of waste as well. And all of those types of precious metals that are used to create solar panels, they have to be mined as well, which is largely a fossil fuel driven industry. And there's also a problem of waste of solar panels as well. And I'm bringing this up because Germany has been famously closing down much of its nuclear infrastructure. And it seems very happy to do so. But that's not actually a good thing, because energy is key to civilization and for development of humanity. So other nations are now deeming nuclear energy to be green, at the same time that Germany is reducing its capacity for nuclear, which has been going on for decades now. But if you look at energy sources in Germany, overall, even with increase in renewables, or so-called renewables, it has been declining to the point where many industries in Germany can no longer operate, and they must close down or move elsewhere. But while this is happening, other countries are actually ramping up on nuclear. So for the first time in 30 years, the US is building new nuclear reactors. And China is building 30 new nuclear plants at an astonishing pace. They can build a new plant in about 2 years and be fully operational. And potentially Germany could build more nuclear plants as well. But eventually you're going to need Bitcoin to build these plants, because you need to buy the technology. And this is just a fun picture I found saying it'll be back. And I believe it will be back, because the trend is that more energy is needed, both for traditional industries, but also with AI. AI compute and training of the models requires a lot of energy. And Bitcoin mining also requires energy. And this is a chart that I like to show, but there's no such thing as a low energy rich country. Every country that is wealthy and produces things like China, India, the United States, they all have a decent amount of energy. But the important thing here is that having energy should equal having Bitcoin. So as more and more countries start to realize this change in the equation of wealth, that if they have energy, they have money, the more of them will start to mine Bitcoin. And we've already seen Bhutan has revealed that they hold, I think, 13,000 Bitcoin, and they've been mining for about 4 years. So this is just one that is outed, and they kept it secret for a good amount of time. But I believe there are more countries actually right now that are already using excess energy to mine Bitcoin. So yeah, there are no low energy developed countries. So hopefully nuclear can make a comeback in Germany. So why Bitcoin? Bitcoin is the best form of money that we have, and it's outperforming the blue line, which is S&P 500, and the yellow line at the bottom, which is gold. So it's definitely important for every country to have Bitcoin, because there is a large potential for Bitcoin to grow. It's effectively an asymmetric bet. So this is my projection. I'm using 60% median annual growth for Bitcoin price appreciation. And I don't know if you can read the chart, but in 10 years' time, we should be at $7 million per coin. So this is a conservative projection, and I think it's probably going to be higher than this. But if this is what comes to pass, then I think you should have some Bitcoin. So this is just comparing two models. The orange line is my model, 60% median growth. The blue line is Saylor's Bitcoin 24 model, but I think he's underestimating the growth potential. So there is also a inflow to market cap relationship between money that's coming into Bitcoin and the price appreciation. So in 2021, the Bank of America extrapolated that $93 million of inflows would be required to increase the Bitcoin price by 1%. And if you work backwards, which some people did, it comes out to 118 times multiplier. So $1 increases market cap by $118. And it goes to show that the potential to increase is much lower for Bitcoin than it is for gold or treasuries. But I think that is a bit high. I think it might be more conservative to estimate with a 20x multiplier. But there is a multiplier, and that's the main point. Basically, if if you wanted to buy 245,000 Bitcoin, the market cap you'll add 15 billion, but you'll increase market cap by 300 billion. So the point of this is that to buy back the Bitcoin that was sold is going to be more and more difficult, especially with competition to other countries that are mining or buying Bitcoin. Bitcoin's also going mainstream, which is another reason to start considering building a Bitcoin treasury. You have MicroStrategy with 250,000, and then you have Marathon and Tesla blocking Semler Scientific, which was a new entrant, I think this year, that started mirroring the MicroStrategy playbook. And then you have Metaplanet as well in Japan, which just spun up recently as well. But in terms of the largest Bitcoin reserves, I think right now China is in lead with 190,000, then followed by the US. And then Germany or Saxony had close to 50,000, but that's gone now. And maybe you can get it back. I hope so. But if you look at overall the landscape of Bitcoin reserves, the US actually is a Bitcoin superpower, even though they don't have that many owned by the government. You have MicroStrategy with a very large portion, but the US ETFs now hold over 960,000 Bitcoin. So the race to accumulate Bitcoin is ramping up very rapidly. Germany also has been a country that has a large amount of gold reserves in the past, historically. So it's one of the top. I think after the US, it's number 2. And the US has 8,000 tons and Germany has 3,300 tons roughly. And we see recently that central banks are rapidly trying to accumulate gold. And that is interesting, but not very practical, because this is a chart showing gold's performance against Bitcoin. It's not very good. But if you look at Germany's holdings of gold at 3,300 tons, then right now, technically you should have, or you should aim to have 281,000 Bitcoin in your strategic reserves. And there's still time, but the time window is closing very rapidly to be able to accumulate this much. So there has also been a marked change in discourse around Bitcoin. It's no longer something that's used by people in dark markets or buying drugs. It is now a form of legal tender in El Salvador. So El Salvador famously has made Bitcoin legal tender, and they've launched a number of other strategies as well. Last year, I think Robert Kennedy Jr., who was a presidential candidate in the US, he also started talking about it. And this year he said he wanted to put together a reserve of 4 million Bitcoin. And we've seen Milei come up in Argentina, and he has not made Bitcoin legal tender or announced a Bitcoin strategic reserve yet. But he has deregulated money, and they've tacitly encouraged people to conduct trade in Bitcoin. And this year, Trump has gone to the Bitcoin conference, and he made a speech saying he wants Bitcoin to be made in the US. And practically speaking, Senator Cynthia Lummis has put together a bill that would allow the US to actually create their strategic Bitcoin reserve, which is aiming to accumulate 1 million Bitcoin, or roughly 5% of the supply. So Bitcoin adoption is real. It is happening as we speak around the world, and the race is heating up, and it will only continue to heat up more. So what can countries do in terms of strategies? There's 3 primary strategies. One is simply buy Bitcoin, put it into the treasury. The second is to issue a Bitcoin bond or use sovereign debt to buy Bitcoin. So effectively, MicroStrategy playbook for nation states. And the third thing is to pass Bitcoin-friendly laws that can make Bitcoin usable either as legal tender or eliminating capital gains or approving of Bitcoin to be used in commerce. So El Salvador has famously done most of the 3 things, or almost 3 things. So they made Bitcoin legal tender. They've passed a digital securities laws, which allows them to facilitate other securities offerings in the country, but more so paving the way for Bitcoin bonds, which I believe should come out this year, fingers crossed. So why is Bitcoin important? Bitcoin is important because it is consuming all of the fiat currencies. And this is inevitable, simply because Bitcoin is the hardest form of money, and it is more durable, and it is more portable, and it has better verifiability than any other form of money on the planet. Countries that adopt a Bitcoin strategy today are going to have a massive advantage in the future. And again, the time window is closing on that. And finally, in closing, you do not sell your Bitcoin. Do you want to translate that?
Man verkauft die Bitcoin nicht.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Samson. So, are there any questions? Gibt's Fragen? Gerne auch auf Deutsch, wir übersetzen. I think I can start. You talked about Trump. I don't think Trump gets Bitcoin, to be honest, after releasing his coin now. I really doubt it. Do you really think if he gets elected, he will push forward with Bitcoin? He has his Bitcoin people on his team, or?
Well, Trump is an interesting character. He likes to, I think he likes to say that he fulfilled his promises. So if you look at what he did in the previous election, he was talking about building the wall. Did they build the wall to the full scale that they said they were going to build it? No, but they built parts of the wall. So even if he only does a part of the Bitcoin strategic reserve, maybe he buys 100,000 coins. I don't know. But that is something. But at least we know that we have access to Trump through a lot of the people lobbying in the US. And we know that he is at least not against Bitcoin. And yes, he is, promoting altcoins and whatnot, but sometimes you have to choose the lesser of two evils.
Okay. Any other question?
Mr. Mow, my name is Dirk Spaniel. I'm a member of this parliament, and I have one question concerning your assumption model, how Bitcoin is going to evolve. And what kind of assumptions are different through that conservative path, which is very much lower from the value? What are the differences in your assumptions or in your model? Would be interesting for me.
Well, my model is actually very simple. It's just 60% median growth every year. And if you go back 5 to 10 years, roughly you see the same trajectory. But one thing that most models don't account for is that there will be a point at which people just stop using fiat currencies. So we can project out 10 years, 20 years, but the reality is we're probably not going to go to 20 million a coin. And eventually, at some point, we'll just use Bitcoin as the unit of account. So with money, you have three parts of paths to evolution: store of value, unit of account, medium of exchange. So unit of account right now is still the dollar. Even countries that don't use the dollar, their currencies are pseudo pegged to the dollar or directly pegged to the dollar. But eventually we'll just price things in Satoshis, which is the smallest unit of Bitcoin.
And so one of the strategies was to have Bitcoin-friendly laws. Now, there's always debate, what is Bitcoin-friendly law, right? Any law that restricts anything or regulates something might be seen as something that the original Bitcoiners don't want to have in place. But it's fair to say that probably Germany, we're typically trying to put things in a box and trying to regulate it, has been pretty good at putting language after it that is regulating at the first draft at least, and we're getting into a new phase actually next year with Mika. But we just scathed by that self-custody wallets were not prohibited, right? And that's maybe comes the next version. But what do you consider to be good laws in Bitcoin? Is it to have the definition of ownership of what a digital asset is, or I would like to hear how you talk to a nation state saying what they would have to put in place to make not just legal tender, but make just the commerce on upon Bitcoin something that is feasible.
Well, I think ultimately everyone is going to use Bitcoin. It's either you accept it or you wait until you have no choice, because the person you want to buy bread from doesn't want a euro anymore. So at that point, do the regulations really matter? It's just near term. I think you can have good regulations or bad regulations, but the legal tender law, I don't think is really legal tender even in El Salvador, because merchants are not forced to accept it. Larger companies are accepting it because they want to make sure they follow the letter of the law. But by and large, most people don't accept Bitcoin yet in El Salvador even, and they're not forced to. So if I go to a business and I say I want to pay in Bitcoin, they say no, I can't call the police. I don't think anyone's going to enforce that. And I think the deregulation path of Argentina is probably more practical, just saying, just use whatever you want. And you can use Bitcoin as money. And there is no barrier there. There's no taxation on it, because you shouldn't be taxed on using money to buy daily goods. And I think places like Switzerland are okay as well because there is no capital gains tax. So you can, for example, in Lugano, just spend Bitcoin and buy whatever you want, and it's just treated as money too. And there was no regulation needed for that as well. So I guess it depends really on if there is anything currently prohibiting, because some countries don't allow people to use Bitcoin for payments as well. So either you need to amend that or make a new regulation saying, yes, Bitcoin can be used. So it's very different per country, but I think the countries that we are focused on are more in the developing world, and they are seeking economic growth and investment. So for them, it's not really worrying about all these things that maybe Europeans worry about, but they just want money to come in. And if Bitcoin is an avenue for that, then they will welcome that.
There was a question there.
Maybe. The MicroStrategy playbook that you described is essentially a company issuing debt and basically buying Bitcoin with it. That Bitcoin is then put on a balance sheet, sort of increases the valuation of the company so they can borrow more, right? And if we kind of put this on the scale of governments or nation states, right now we see the nation states issue a lot of debt and they just consume it, right? They put it into consumption, like social security, give it to people, whatever. Have you actually had in your encounters with different governments, like literally like told them, hey, why don't you just, you're issuing the debt anyway, you could easily buy an asset with it, and that asset goes in your books, and you could still use that as a collateral to issue essentially the same amount of debt that you had before, but now you also have the asset. Is that something that people are receptive for? Do they get it, or do they think like, wait, that's like, how can we?
I don't think they get it yet. So when I speak about Bitcoin bonds, it's just, issue the debt and buy Bitcoin, not to leverage the Bitcoin to do anything with it. I think that's more sophisticated, and that's probably more in the realm of Michael Saylor and his clever financial engineering. But I think if a country did issue debt to buy Bitcoin and just held it, that is already good enough, and that could eliminate most of their debt. At least that was the idea for El Salvador.
There's a question.
First of all, thank you for your presentation. I have a slightly different perception maybe of hyper-Bitcoinization, and I wanted to ask you how the idea of a probably fractional reserve of Bitcoin and states in hands of governments and states that they would use to maybe fund or peg another kind of fiat currency towards their Bitcoin reserves. How does it match to your image of a hyper-Bitcoinized world? Because it doesn't match with mine.
Yeah, well, I don't know if it is possible to, I guess you're hinting at backing a currency with Bitcoin, right? And it would still be inferior. So the question is, in a world where everyone is transacting in Bitcoin directly, would anyone want that fractional backed currency, or would they be forced to use it, which is also the case too with a lot of fiat currencies too. I just don't see it surviving in the long run.
Would you then, like, for me, Bitcoin, just the idea of the separation of money and state, so why would we want states to have huge sums of money that they didn't earn through proof of work, but mostly if we do the MicroStrategy playbook by proof of stake?
Well, I guess it has to do with human motivation. Like, which government in the world doesn't want something that's valuable? Like, I remember seeing a comic book or comic strip. It was this elf or something that has he's collecting bottle caps, and then the taxman goes to him and said, "You pay your taxes," and he says, "I don't use your money, I have bottle caps." And then the taxman says, he pauses, and then he says, "Give me those bottle caps." So if Bitcoin is valuable, states are going to want it one way or another. And right now, as you saw, the bulk of the holdings are from seizures from criminal activities. But in the future, that could change to mining, because if you look at it, at least the way I look at it, is a state is basically they're the homeowner association. They operate the land and they have all the energy, and they can direct that to do different things, like mining Bitcoin. So they could mine it for themselves. And we already see that there is a potential for Bitcoin mining to balance grids. And if you're going to nuclear, you have a very large base load already that you need to consume. So why not mine Bitcoin with it? So eventually, there is no such thing as a mining company. It's just an energy company, and they all mine. And if they all mine, then and they're state-owned, then the state can produce its own Bitcoin. But I think the key is that we are engaging to make sure that if there are policies that come out, it's not bad policies, and there are protections in place to ordinary Bitcoin holders, rather than letting policies go unchecked. Like we talked about the self-custody and those issues there. If there was no pushback, that could have gone through. So it's just a question of if you think engagement and intervention is a net good or a net negative, but I think it's a net good because education is never bad one way or another.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So I'm wondering, how do nation states actually buy Bitcoin in a secure way? Like, is it just laying around? Who has access to the wallet in the seed phrase? And what happens in a change of governance?
That's a very good question. And I think we're still very early on that. So El Salvador was using custodian to store their Bitcoin. And then they announced this year, I think, that they moved to cold storage. So it'd be the same, but there is added complexity of how keys are managed when there is a transition of power. And I don't have a good answer. We have to see. But eventually, if Bitcoin is held by governments, there is going to be a case where somebody just takes it eventually. We'll find out, and it'll be interesting to watch.
Thank you.
Hello, can you please tell a little bit more of El Salvador that is close to issuing Bitcoin bonds? So was it easy to convince El Salvador to issue that, or was it just the next logic step?
I think from the time we brought it up and proposed it, it was about 2 or 3 months. So relatively quick, but they haven't issued it yet. So from thinking that they want to do it to execution, it's been a few years, I think. But it's hard to say the reason why it's delayed. It could be pressure from the IMF or other agencies. But we know at least the IMF doesn't like their Bitcoin law or their adoption of Bitcoin, period.
So I'm worrying about states like Germany, Europe, the developed world that are quite happy, let's say, with how they can control the flow of money, how they can, for example, collect taxes and have very deep insights into how money flows. What point would, or what factors would be needed to reach a point where a state is willing to give that up and say, okay, we're okay with you all loading Bitcoin and transacting in it, because that, so far there's quite the reluctance on the end of the EU and states there.
Yeah, it's very difficult to say, but it is a free market. So people that don't want to be surveilled are going to move elsewhere, and they will take their wealth with them. So the question is, at which point does it hurt too much and they have to amend their thinking or policies to be more friendly? But the competition is really with the developing world at this point, right? The developing world is trying to divert a river of capital in, whereas developed or first world countries are more concerned about counting the droplets of rain that are landing on their country. So I think it'll come to a head in the next 2 to 3 years because of outflow of capital. And the challenge is you cannot control money at this point because of Bitcoin. So it's the realization of that and the acceptance of that, but I don't know when.
Basically, it comes down, what you're saying, just so I understand correctly, then it's kind of this movement that goes ahead because people just use it, whether they're allowed or not. So at a certain point, the state has to kind of deal with it. So the state wouldn't have an inherent incentive to say, okay, we have an advantage other than, for example, storing money in it or seeing that the value rises?
Yeah, I would say so. Thanks.
Thank you, Samson, for your speech. And I did very much. Saxon, I'd be interested about the change of the attitudes in the governments. I suppose you're one of the few people who have seen and talked to different governments and seen the development of the dance from the first acceptance, let me say, from an early stage till acceptance. We completely understand there is a lot of different currency and legal systems we clearly can't compare. But maybe you've seen some type of early thinking about development, the developing and with attitude towards new money. How could you describe these steps toward the first acceptance? Maybe?
So, good question. I'm not sure if there is a step. I think most countries that are going to look towards Bitcoin as a new form of money are probably doing it out of necessity. And the more developed countries are simply just going to follow. And I think right now, at least what it seems like, is the US election is going to have an outsized effect on this, because most countries do follow the US. But there's just not a lot of strong leadership to make a stand and say, you know, we're going to adopt Bitcoin, just because they want to see someone else do it first. So I think Trump is going to win, and I think he is going to do something, and I think everyone will follow after that. So it's not so much a strategic plan and action. It's more about following on or trying to fast follow. But fast follow doesn't really work that well, at least in terms of Bitcoin, because there's just a finite supply. In a fiat world where you can print to make up a difference or being late, you can't really do that with Bitcoin. So if you look at the ETFs as an example, Hong Kong and Australia were waiting on the US to approve and greenlight it first. And now they came second and third, but the US has close to 1 million. Hong Kong has 10,000 something, and then Australia has 100 something. So if you're following, just take a zero off for whatever place you are in line.
So, as I understand Bitcoin, it levels the playing field on the rules of money. And I think that's a good thing. So, how or why do you think educating people that have the power right now in this reality to abuse the rules of money to their own advantage, why do you think educating them on this revolutionary tool is beneficial to all of us and not just to the people who might take their power to abuse the current rules to gain an unfair advantage in the new world we're all trying to get into?
Good question. Well, I think people that want to abuse the rules and abuse their power are going to do so anyways. And I think Bitcoin can change people for the better. So if you take two people as a test and you give one of them, and both want to abuse power, and you give one of them Bitcoin, it's more likely that the one that you educated and got into Bitcoin is going to change because they understand at least the Bitcoin ethos and maybe sound money. But the more important thing is that with Bitcoin, you can't really abuse the system because the system treats everyone equally. So even if you're impoverished and you're unbanked, you have the same ability to acquire Bitcoin as Michael Saylor. I think that is the more important thing, just getting it into the hands of people. So, for example, El Salvador, they adopted Bitcoin, and maybe they have like 500,000 people using it, or 300,000. It's estimated, but at least those 300,000 people now have access to Bitcoin. Whereas if they didn't adopt it, then it'd be zero or close to zero. So I think, again, you have to take the good with the bad. So if a government accepts it and they endorse it, then the people are going to benefit and they are going to have Bitcoin which levels the playing field, I think, at the end of the day. And you do see some of this playing out in the US. So, like, President Trump is speaking at a Bitcoin conference. You have major senators there. Senator Elizabeth Warren is probably going to lose, or at least she's fighting a heated battle with Deaton for a Senate seat. So why are they able to compete, and why are they at Bitcoin conferences? It's because we have a significant amount of wealth in the hands of Bitcoiners now. So it is changing the game.
Who was first? You first?
Yes, hello, my name is Reinhard. I'm from Hamburg. The question is this. We're looking at two ugly wars out of the Ukraine, two out in the Maltese. Let's all hope that these war will do the wars will be contained as much as possible. But what the crazies get even crazier, and we get into a full-blown war. On the internet, they talk about what even the millionaires be. What implications would that first on the price of Bitcoin? And the actual political question then is, well, what is the political risk involved if such a war actually happens? Which leads me to my second question. What implications do you think does Bitcoin have on war and peace in general? In other words, could Bitcoin be the peace currency?
Okay, I'll answer the second question first, and then you have to re-ask the first one because I'm jet-lagged. So I think Bitcoin defunds wars. It's difficult to finance a war if you actually have to go to people that have custody of the asset or the money. It's easy to finance a war if you can print the money. And it's the same for everything. Most government policies are not of the will of the people. And I'm from Canada, so I can tell you, we didn't want to buy the vaccines, but the government bought the vaccines. We didn't want the $84 million app that you use to register when you enter and leave the country, but they did that anyway. So if they had to ask and collect the money for that, no one would give them the money for that. And it's the same with financing war. So I believe Bitcoin will usher it in an age of peace because the people that are corrupt, that want war, won't be able to finance the war. And what's your first question again?
What implications would a larger war or two, what larger wars have in the world on the price of Bitcoin, and what is the political risk in case Germany had a Bitcoin reserve?
So the impact of the war, probably markets would tank and Bitcoin will go down, but eventually Bitcoin will go back up because Bitcoin is likely going to be the only financial network that is going to be operating if there is full-blown war and sides are split up and lines are drawn across the board. One thing that people seem to forget is that financial systems don't work during wartime. You can't send money to anybody, and it depends on where you are and what app you're using, but probably a lot of them won't work. Venmo probably won't work. PayPal probably won't work. So everyone will just end up using Bitcoin. And bank balances will disappear for some reason or other. Maybe a bank data center is hit. So Bitcoin will be the only thing that functions at the end of the day. What was the other part of your question? There's another piece to it, right? So I think I don't think there is a political risk. Any country that has a strong reserve of Bitcoin or large reserve of Bitcoin will be in a good position. The political risk might be, people come to Germany to ask for financing. But I think having Bitcoin is de-risking, because if you have gold, then you're at risk of seizure of the gold, especially if you have the gold in your own territory. So I was in Taiwan recently and I was meeting with some politicians there. They have 400 something tons of gold, 422, I believe. And it's just sitting under a mountain. But you can see there is a serious risk there. If Taiwan was invaded and you want to mount a resistance, but your gold is taken, how exactly do you finance the resistance? So Bitcoin is actually superior in terms of national defense because you can just have it in multi-sig wallet. And even the keys don't even need to all be in the country. It could be scattered. So strategically, in terms of military defense, it definitely is very pragmatic to have Bitcoin reserves. Good question.
Hello, hi to every year. I have a question, or two questions. It's why do the BRICS states not use Bitcoin for their currency? And why do the former French colonies, who are tied to the CFA, not use Bitcoin in their strategy? And what do you think is the next country who will adopt Bitcoin as legal?
Okay, 3 questions. So why don't the CFA states and countries in Africa not stop using the CFA franc, right? I think it has to do with threats. So I think Libya was one that tried to leave, and Gaddafi was assassinated. So I think everyone that wants to leave, they can't leave, but they're welcome to try, I guess. But there has been a lot of intervention to make sure nobody leaves, at least what I've seen and read. The other one is why does the BRICS not use Bitcoin? I think it has to do with just the corruption that we talked about earlier. They don't want the people to have it, but they probably have it. Like Russia is probably a state that is mining Bitcoin for themselves. But do they want the people to have it? Maybe not. So they'd rather the people have a BRICS currency, but maybe the people in charge want the Bitcoin. And there was a third question, right?
Yeah. Yeah, first I want to say that Libya, it's not a former CFA country, French colony.
Right, they wanted to go on a gold standard.
Yeah, that's why. But I talk about Burkina Faso, Niger, these countries. And the last question was, what you think is the next country in England that Bitcoin is intended?
I'm not sure. For a Jan 3, we're working on a few, but legal tender is not in the cards for any of the ones that we're engaged with yet. And I don't think we need to press for legal tender. As long as they open the door to Bitcoin in some way, I think it's just as good. Either the creation of special economic zones or building a Bitcoin treasury. I think legal tender is very difficult to get because most countries, they don't have a clear majority in the Senate or the Parliament. So El Salvador being able to do that is sort of an outlier.
There's one question back there.
As a Russian, I have the question again, the Russian government. And some actually have seen that Russia has denied Bitcoin a very long time. And since recently, starting adopting it. Due or approve the regulation starting in November. So my question is pretty simple. Did they ask you to consult them?
No, not yet.
Yeah.
Thank you for your presentation. I have a question. In a planned economy, you don't need any reserves because you have the perfect plan. In a free market, you have some uncertainties and definitely you need reserves. You put up a number there for Germany, how big the Bitcoin reserve should be. What is the background of this number? I think, is it either at the moment because of the relatively new and low block prices, buy as much as you can, or is there already some, I don't know, formula or approach how to determine which amount of Bitcoin are necessary for a country? Right.
So I'm presenting, I guess, to the government. And if the government has gold reserves, then it makes sense that you base the Bitcoin number off of the gold reserves, because they might say, why do we want 260,000 Bitcoin? Well, why do you want 4,000 tons of gold, right? So I think they should reason it out themselves, because if you have this, you should have that. And I don't know why you have the gold, but obviously there's a reason for it, so you should have the Bitcoin too.
So you put out these 3 points, if I remember correctly, for a government to adopt Bitcoin as a legal tender, to have profitable regulation or a relatively loose regulation on taxes. But so, and you said that El Salvador ticked all 3 of these boxes, but El Salvador is still a fiat-based government. It doesn't operate on the Bitcoin standard yet. So my question to you would be, what steps need to be taken in the future for the El Salvadorian government to truly become a Bitcoin standard government?
Well, I think there's always more things that can be done, but how can they go further? I think it's just getting more adoption in the country in and of itself. I think the low adoption rates probably have to do with awareness and education. And there are initiatives, but they're not government initiatives. They're more grassroots, like Mi Primer Bitcoin, right? It's not a government initiative. But I think they are starting to try to incorporate some things into the curriculums, but it just takes time. Like, there is no pressing need for Bitcoin right now. People are just happy to have it and being able to accept it. Most people that accept Bitcoin are actually converting to dollars too. So it really has more to do with education than anything else to make the people aware that they should have Bitcoin.
May I add to this question that, so when you say that education is one of the most important parts of people adopting a currency in your country, shouldn't your consulting agency focus on teaching the government how to implement an education program on Bitcoin for their citizens, instead of focusing on teaching corrupt individuals how to game the system for their advantage to get in the Bitcoin reserve and maybe use it to fund wars or whatever? Because if I have a big reserve, I can continue doing the shit I'm doing now for an extended amount of period into the Bitcoin standard.
Well, you kind of said it yourself. If they're corrupt, then they're not going to want to educate the people. So you have to get it into the door somehow, which is get a reserve accumulation of Bitcoin. But I don't think it's likely that most governments are going to have a significant amount of Bitcoin at the end of the day. It's just getting too late now. And I mean, if you look at it, the US has an outsized amount of Bitcoin overall, from MicroStrategy to ETFs to their own holdings. So any country that actually accumulates with some Bitcoin would serve to better distribute Bitcoin holdings geographically and geopolitically, which in my view de-risks a lot of things. Having one superpower with a lot outsized amount is not necessarily a good thing, or even access to it, right? They can seize the ETF holdings if they really wanted to. And we've seen time and time again that laws are malleable, constitutions are malleable. There's no real rule of law, but at least with Bitcoin and people holding Bitcoin, there's a certainty that, barring $5 rental tax, you can't really take it. And it's not easy to take it from people.
Is it true that you personally orange-pilled the president of El Salvador?
No, I think he was already orange-pilled.
Okay.
I just nudged.
Yes.
You just said it yourself that right now, like, the majority of the Bitcoin holdings are held within custodians, essentially that are under the jurisdiction and influence of the government, and they could, if they wanted to, pass a law to seize ETF holdings or seize the Sailor's MicroStrategy holdings and whatnot. And then a whole lot of the freedom, so to speak, that Bitcoin actually delivers, we still depend on the laws of the land. Now, would you agree that self-custody, that the people actually have to hold the Bitcoin themselves, like holding the 12 or 24 words, is actually like the most important thing? And that is that if we really want to like have a Bitcoin economy, or want to say that this actually delivers, makes war unaffordable, that sort of stuff, that people have to take ownership of their own coins, that this is actually the most important thing?
I would say so. I mean, for all the reasons outlined and prior history, like the Executive Order 6102, it shows like self-custody and possession of your keys is probably the most important thing. But it takes time for people to get there. And if they hold ETFs first or some sort of vehicle and they learn about Bitcoin, it still gives them the opportunity to graduate from that. And we did see that with El Salvador. So they went from custodian to self-custody. So there is a path there. But that path may not be open for that long, because we do see things like in the UK where they only want you to withdraw from one exchange into another exchange. So it can be possible that Bitcoin is separated into two parts. Free Bitcoin, which is free flowing from people that have it in self-custody, and Bitcoin that's held within institutions that never leaves those institutions.
Please.
I'm Samson for representation producing. Sorry to understand correctly, we are traveling a lot around the world talking to governments. And you mentioned a couple that are now showing interest in Bitcoin. We probably talk to many more that actually don't buy it, that don't take the bait. Do you see any similarities in the governments that now show interest in Bitcoin? For example, with El Salvador, if I recall correctly, Bukete's brother maybe was into it, and that's how we got interest in that. So now there are countries thinking about adopting or mining. And I'm just wondering, is there anything that you see, where you see similarities in these different governments that I go say, oh, that might be something that sparks their interest, right? Maybe some technical background, right? Some might problem with their money. I have something that, and if you see anything here like that in Germany, right, where maybe in any specific part less of one.
Yeah, I think it has to do with necessity. So necessity is the mother of invention and also the mother of Bitcoin adoption. So if there's a need for economic growth or for money, then they will be more likely to look at it. And I think developed countries are more focused on protecting what they have and, making regulations, not so much for economic growth. But some of the countries that we engage with, they want growth. They want money to come in. And that just does not seem to be a concern for places like Europe. It's more about, I don't know, what do Europeans want? I don't know. But it doesn't seem like they want investment and money to come in.
You mentioned that Lugano and Switzerland is also interested in Bitcoin. So what are
Switzerland is not Europe.
That's the difference. Yes, please.
Sorry, but one last question. You get paid for your consulting services by a government, right? Now they pay you a Bitcoin?
No, it's all free. I wish they would pay. Joanna? But a lot of people think that we get paid, but Jan3 is a company. We raise money to build Aqua, and that's really it. All the nation-state work we do is basically out of pocket because we think it's valuable. So when we go to Suriname or other places, it's just, Bitcoin has been good, and we think we should give back. But there is a business model too. Potentially, if a country issues a Bitcoin bond, and we help them structure that, then we can ask for some basis points off of the issuance. But no one is asking us to or paying us to come and talk about Bitcoin. They don't want to. They don't even know about Bitcoin. So it's an uphill battle. And at the same time, you have people running interference too. So we were in Suriname. We had a lot of meetings, and we were close to getting the central bank to allocate just 1% to Bitcoin. And then the World Bank visited 2 weeks later, and they stopped talking to us.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
They're quick.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're pretty agile.
Right there.
Thank you very much. Mr. Mow, I'm very interested in your opinion on the altcoins. Do you think that altcoins have also future alongside Bitcoin?
No. Sorry?
How about Ethereum?
No.
Okay.
So with the geopolitical segregation of the world, obviously there's problems coming with regards to that. world, all the changes, etc. So we've seen one of the big mistakes I think that the Federal Reserve has done is to seize or froze the assets, the US dollar assets of the Russian government at the beginning of the conflict. Right? Your sale job must have gotten a lot easier as a result of that. Because are you going to replace it with the Chinese yuan, or are you going to replace it with the euro, where you're always subject to the same kind of risk at that point in time? And that's first question. Second question, the petrodollar is up for grabs. The contract was not prolonged after 50 years. We've seen one, I think, laughable transaction with XRP, but that must be something, especially as this commodity is so so intergovernmental as a currency. There must be something that is better than a nation state in that context that you could do.
Maybe, but the first question was about the Russians being kicked off of the SWIFT system and their assets seized. You would think that would spark more interest in Bitcoin, but I haven't seen it. And I think it just has to do with people's focus. Like, they're largely distracted by other things. But if they were paying attention, they'd be buying Bitcoin, right? But that's not the case.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty cool what you are doing, orange pilling nation states, trying to do. How do you think it could be more efficient to just orange the completist instead? Like if you would go to Google, Facebook.
It's about the same.
It's about the same.
But probably may have a much more efficient and straightforward way to actually implement it.
True, but it's about the same difficulty, I would say, because if you look at Apple or Google, they're sitting on massive piles of cash. Why haven't they just copied MicroStrategy? I think it's just they don't see the need and they're focused on other things. So it's similar. Companies and countries, it's very similar. Everyone's focused on what they think is important, or they're distracted by other things like wars, and they're not paying attention to the money.
I guess the difference would be that politicians don't really profit themselves. And some people in the room, I guess, are thinking that a lot of politicians are corrupt and don't really care that the government thought like people. If you will actually go to companies, they are shareholders, and even if they would leave the company, spend personal profit from it. Whereas politicians, if they go out of office, there's nothing in that for them.
I think it has to do with perception of risk and fiduciary duty. So they see it as a risk still, and they view it as a breach of fiduciary duty if they adopted something risky. So it'll happen, but maybe at the $1 million Bitcoin mark when it's too late.
So I'd like to put on the question posed earlier by the gentleman in the back, just with regards to other cryptocurrencies, also some that may not exist yet, why you are convinced that Bitcoin is inherently superior, or if there might be something we're not seeing yet that might come out in the future, or what the inherent benefits of it are, obviously other than broad adoption. Share this.
Sorry, what's the question?
Why do you think Bitcoin is inherently superior? Why do you think that? Because
Bitcoin is the only one that's decentralized. Everything else is basically a company pretending to be a decentralized currency.
And in the future, there was another decentralized currency, right? Another cryptocurrency.
I think one civilization can only have one decentralized currency.
Okay, so it's just, first mover advantage that you say, if bloody adopted already, it has its advantages and, it covers everything you would want from a cryptocurrency.
You can't really invent it again because others have tried to do a fair launch. But once digital scarcity is discovered or invented, you can't really do it again, right? I think, what was that one? Mimblewimble or something. They had some good ideas and they tried to do a fair launch, but VCs came in because everyone's aware and watching now, so you can't really do it again. You can't have organic growth of a crypto asset.
All right, thanks.
Any more questions? Yeah, Dan.
can you please explain why the World Bank or maybe even the International Monetary Fund will against Bitcoin? What's going behind the scenes? As far as I remember, I think you mentioned in one of your interviews, they intervened in Suriname. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, they're intervening everywhere. Like the IMF is still intervening in El Salvador, and I think they exerted force in Honduras too. So I don't know if you remember, but right after El Salvador adopted Bitcoin as legal tender, I think that Honduras was looking to do something, and then all of a sudden the central bank just issued a letter saying we'll never touch Bitcoin. But why, like out of the blue, would you do that unless someone told you to do that? But also we know that they're interfering in Argentina as well because they don't want Malay to go all in on Bitcoin. So he took a very cautious route, which is deregulation, which it works. But I think the answer to the question is like, why would a loan shark not want their, I don't know, what do you call it, their patsy to not borrow money from them? That's the simple answer.
Okay, I don't see any more questions. No. So, Samson, thank you very much for coming. Thank you for all your work that you're doing around the world. We really appreciate it that
Thank
you're
you.
here. And we hope to see you again soon with an appointment with our chancellor. Maybe the next one. Maybe he's more open to Bitcoin. Thank you very much for coming. And Samson, thanks again.
Thanks so much.